Thursday. Quinn. I woke up a freaking hour before the alarm clock. My mind was racing. Ma was still at work, Willie still snored in the trundle bed below me, and so I got up and stood in the living room staring out the window. Pink sunrise warmed the house on the other side of the street, but it was still early enough that the dark blue purple of night had not completely burned away. The whole neighborhood looked asleep. I headed for the front door, then down the stoop to the sidewalk. There was no one else out. Not a single car moved on my street, or the two avenues at either end. Everything was still and quiet except for the swoop and chatter of a pair of sparrows darting in and out of driveways. I was completely alone. I looked toward the Galuzzo house. From where I stood, I could see the American flag spearing up in its holder and hanging in loose folds in the air above the front steps. And a memory bit me. The day I stood beneath that flag in a cheap, itchy, dark suit that had once been Paul's and didn't fit Guzzo, but fit me everywhere except that the shoulders were too wide. I remembered Paul, squatting in front of me as I stood on the bottom step, patting my shoulders, trying to adjust the seam so it didn't fall forward over my arm. "Quinn," he'd said, "there are no words that will make you feel any better that he's gone. But know this. You need anything. I mean anything, little man. You come to me." And I remembered how miserable I'd felt, but also that, because Paul made sure I knew he was always going to be there for me, I felt relieved. Even though I didn't have my dad anymore, at least I had a version of his protection. I remembered how Paul, finally satisfied with the seam, had stood, turned toward the street, and held up his hand to block the sunlight from his eyes. And as he did, the shadow of his body fell over mine, blocking all the sunlight from me, too. I didn't have to squint. I looked out at the faces of the people along the sidewalk in front of us, and I did not feel alone. Something else dawned on me. When I'd stood under the flag and I'd looked up at Paul, who promised to take care of me, he had only recently graduated high school. I mean, he hadn't been much older than I was now. He'd probably been thinking the same thing I was this year. Where am I going to be next year, and what the hell am I going to do with my life? What had happened to that guy? Who had he become? Until this week, all anybody had been talking about was the damn basketball scouts. I'd obsessed over it too, what I needed to do to set myself up for tomorrow, next year, and whatever the hell came down the road after that. But as I stood in front of my own house in the cool, violet morning, I had the crazy idea that I could be standing here 30 years from now looking back. In my history class, we talked about how some moments in history are moments people never forget. People could remember exactly where they were and what they were doing. I was 3 years old when 9/11 happened, so I didn't remember it like all the teachers in school did. But Ma did, because she knew what it meant for Dad. Adults were always asking each other, "Where were you when it happened? Where were you?" Well, where was I when Rashad was lying in the street? Where was I the year all these black American boys were lying in the streets, thinking about scouts? Keeping my head down, like Coach said? That was walking away. It was running away, for God's sake. I ran away. Fuck that. I didn't want to run away anymore. I didn't want to pretend it wasn't happening. I wanted to turn around and run right into the face of it. I took a deep breath as the breeze picked up, and as I stared down the street at Paul's house, I knew for damn sure what I was doing this Friday night. I went back inside and began my usual morning workout, and as I was pumping through my squats, I had an idea. I ran into the kitchen and rifled through the junk drawers looking for a black marker. I couldn't find one. I knew I didn't have one, but Willie might. So I crept through our room while he still slept and tried to find something that might work. Finally, in a green plastic box on the floor on his side of the closet, I found a big black permanent marker. Then I dug out one of my plain white t-shirts. On the front, I wrote, "I'm marching." On the back, I wrote, "Are you?" There were plenty of kids, black, white, and everyone else, who looked at me like I was a dumbass when I got to school wearing the t-shirt. And there were plenty of kids, black, white, and everyone else who nodded or slapped hands with me. Even in English class, Mrs. Tracy looked at my t-shirt and smiled. "Me too," she said. And I was actually daring to think that the day was going down much easier than I thought it would when I saw Dean Wyckoff walking down the hall between second and third periods. He stepped in front of me, one eyebrow raised, and read my t-shirt. I assumed he was going to give me one of his signature finger curls, that thing he does that's kind of like he's making fun of himself, but also isn't, and he actually expects you to come closer when he does it. As Dean of Students, he was also Dean of Discipline, and since I was the model son Quinn Collins, I'd never been called to his office before, and I thought, well, if this was going to be my first time, it was worth it. But he didn't give me the finger curl. He nodded, threw a little frown in, but kept on walking, not giving me a hard time at all. Yes, there were some kids giving me the stink eye for wearing the shirt, but no one directly gave me shit until Dwyer found me in the hall after fourth period. He grabbed my elbow and pulled me over to the lockers. "What the hell, man?" His freckly face was so close to mine he barely had to speak much louder than a whisper. "What are you doing?" "What it says I'm doing." Dwyer glanced around the hall. "I said, don't fuck this up. Not fuck this up even more. What the hell, man? You better not let Coach see that shirt. No protest. Remember?" "Dude," I said, yanking my arm out of his grip and stepping back. "People should be able to go to the protest if they want. It's important, man." He pulled up and looked down at me, giving me a face worse than Dean Wyckoff had ever given anybody. "You're whack," Dwyer told me. "What the hell happened to you?" And then he split for class, leaving me to chew on that by myself. I didn't have the words for it, but I felt I had an answer to the question. The rest of the day was a blur of distraction. Nobody was getting much done in class, and I had to hand it to Mrs. Ehrlich, because she trashed her trig plan for the day and wrote a bunch of facts and figures on the board, which I started copying into my notebook fast. In 2012, in the United Kingdom, the number of people, regardless of race, shot and killed by police officers: 1. In 2013, in the United Kingdom, the number of times police officers fired guns in the line of duty / the number of people fatally shot: 3/0. In the United States, in the 7-year period ending in 2012, a white police officer killed a black person nearly 2 times a week. "I'm not much of a talker," she finished up. "You know that. But I know numbers. The numbers don't lie, kids. The numbers always tell a story." Guzzo was nowhere at lunch, but even though he'd avoided me all day, I knew he'd seen my t-shirt. At basketball practice, though, he couldn't avoid me anymore. He showed up late, just as Coach blew his whistle and a chaotic warm-up came to an end. I tried to catch Guzzo's eye, but he wouldn't look at me. Coach had us run drills to get the blood pumping, and then we practiced 4 or 5 plays. The last play was designed specifically for English, and Coach called it Fist. It was an isolation offense to run when another team played us man-to-man defense. We'd all form a column in the paint, as English called the play, at the top of the key, and then we'd scatter and make a wide box away from the net so English could take his man one-on-one to the hoop, because he could beat anybody off the dribble, and he did. Even though we knew the play as we ran it, English beat us all again and again. He was unstoppable. And when it was finally time to scrimmage, Coach asked us to play hard, and he let the point guards call whatever plays they wanted. He struck a good balance. I was playing on the team opposite English most of the time, and even though Fist was designed for him, he didn't call it. He ran every other play once, twice. He ran gold 3 times. And then finally, after I'd sunk a 3 from my sweet spot, English calmly walked the ball up the court to the hash mark and called Fist. He blazed past Nam for the easy layup. We missed at the other end, and English didn't push the fast break. He slowed it all down, got to the top of the key, called Fist again, spun a circle around Nam and another one around Toombs, who came in from the weak side to help, and swooped under the basket with a reverse layup. He did it a 3rd time in a row, and this time, when he put his fist in the air, he paused and said, "Rashad." and waved his fist like a flag before zigzagging a fierce line to the hoop, banging and slipping past nearly everybody. He yelled and slapped the backboard as he went up for the layup and nailed it. We were glistening with sweat under the incandescent lights in the gym, all breathing heavy, even English, as he jogged backward to set up for D, and somehow, even though I was concentrating on the play, another part of my brain recognized how stupid it was to believe Rashad's name wasn't on all our minds. How interconnected all these things were in our lives. How we couldn't just separate basketball from the rest of our life. Just like we couldn't separate history from the present. Just like we couldn't have racism in America without racist. My team pushed the ball up the court, and you could already feel the nerves bouncing in our bodies. Nam kicked the ball down low as I made my cut to the far corner. But someone else got a finger on it, so it spun off course, and Gutsu and I chased after the loose ball. It had nearly rolled out of bounds, but he slammed into me anyway. We hit the floor, and what might have looked like good hustle was actually just us ripping at each other more than the ball itself, elbowing each other until finally the ball rolled away and the two of us wrestled on the floor. I slipped out of Gutso's grip and got to my feet. His face was a twisted mitt of hate. He hated my guts, and I think he hated everyone's guts at that moment, but mine. Most of all, and I didn't blame him. Coach blew his whistle, but Gutso just stared dead at me. We got back into the scrimmage, and I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't shake the snarl on Gutso's face when he looked at me any more than I could shake Rashad's name from my head. The game started up again, and after only a few trips up and down the court, I found myself going for a rebound against Gutso, and it was like he had been waiting for this all day. Because as I went up for the ball, I caught a flash of his elbow in the corner of my eye, and then I felt my lip explode. I fell straight on my ass, tried to stand, wobbled, and collapsed. Everybody was around me in seconds, Gutso first. He had his hand out, helping me up, apologizing loudly, saying it was an accident. My whole head rang like the bells of St. Mary's after Easter Mass. It was an accident, Gutso kept insisting. And while I'm sure no one believed him, Coach let it slide and told me to go clean myself up. It was getting near the end of practice anyway, and I didn't want to hear any damn speeches or anything, especially more rules about not going to the march. I'd worn the t-shirt. Now I was committed. As I washed and I got changed, my mind was on fire, and it would have been impossible to chant team if Coach had asked me to. I was ready to go when the rest of the team came into the locker room. I slung my backpack over my shoulder, and on my way out, I found English. I told him we should just call the play Rashad instead of Fist, something everybody in the stands would have to hear every time we ran the play. I know, English told me. I'd already been thinking that. We smiled and slapped hands. I was out of the locker room and heading down the hall to the doors when Coach called my name. I turned, and he called me back to him. He stood with his legs spread in a Superman stance by the door to the locker room, but twirling his whistle in one hand. Collins, he said when I got back to him. I don't think you're thinking this through. I shrugged. He gestured to my shirt. I want to remind you what I'm talking about. I nodded. Yes, sir, I said. The tone in his voice was flat and deadening, and frankly starting to scare me a little. This bullshit, he said, pointing at my chest again, has to stop. You know the rules. Sir, I began, but he cut me off. No excuses. I'm calling your mother about this too. You need to straighten your shit out. Stay focused. And remember, we have everything riding on next week in every practice, in every game for the rest of the season. You hear me? I was about to speak, but he put his hand up. Actions speak louder than words, son. He bent forward, his eyes wide. You got too much riding on this, Collins. He turned and walked past the locker room toward his office. Even though I hate when people call me son, like they have any friggin' right to call me that, I couldn't go after him or tell him or say anything to him because I knew for damn sure he meant what he said and he was going to call Ma right then. I got the hell out of there before anyone else slipped out of the locker room to give me a hard time, and I left the gym by the side door like usual. I was about to pull out my phone to text Jill when I saw Guzzo leaning against the wall a few feet away, still in his basketball shorts and t-shirt. "I've been trying to find you all day," I started, but he didn't waste any time talking. He charged. He swung as soon as he was close enough, and I blocked it, but the force knocked me back into the brick wall. He swung again, and I shielded my head, but he got me in the chest with his other fist. I lost my guard, and he slugged me across the cheek. I spun and hit the ground. I wasn't thinking clearly. The grooves in the concrete were moving in and out of focus, but I knew enough to know that my body wasn't being hit anymore. Mostly I was fine. He'd hit twice, and that must have been enough. Maybe he'd even scared himself, because if he'd wanted to, he could have ruined me right there. But instead he just hovered over me, calling me all kinds of names, telling me how awful I was for turning my back on him, on Paul, following the crowd and jumping on the Rashad bandwagon because it was the easy thing to do. First Jill gets all crazy and radical, and now you. What the fuck? I rolled over and tried to catch my breath. "Don't let me see your face in our house again," Guzzo went on. "Don't even speak to me. We play ball, but we don't speak to each other. You got me?" I sat up against the brick wall and gave a short nod. I unzipped my coat and wiped the blood from my mouth with the t-shirt that said I was marching. At the sight of the shirt, Guzzo spat on me and slammed the door behind him as he stormed back into the gym. I didn't want anyone making more of a big deal about Guzzo and me, so I hauled myself up and hurried away before anyone came out. I went the long way around, hit the Burger King, and leaned against the stall door in the bathroom with wads of toilet paper pressed to my lips until the bleeding stopped. I was all right. I could walk. I could see. I'd stopped bleeding. My cheekbone didn't feel broken. I didn't need to go to the hospital or anything. Oh, shit. I stood in the locked stall, staring up at the weak, flickering bathroom light, thinking about how I'd seen Rashad on the concrete a week before, and I hadn't even known who he was. And now, not even a week later, what the hell? Rashad and I had been beaten up by brothers from the same family? But even thinking that was off base, because there was no comparison. The beatings were no comparison. The reasons for the beatings were no comparison. I wasn't going to stand there and pretend I knew what life was like for Rashad. There was no way. We lived in the same goddamn city, went to the same goddamn school, and our lives were so very goddamn different. Why? You'd think we'd have so much in common, for God's sake. Maybe we even did. And yet, why was there so much shit in between us? So much shit, I could barely even see the guy. It was like Jill said, nobody wants to think he's being a racist, but maybe it was a bigger problem. Like everyone was just ignoring it. Like it was invisible. Maybe it was all about racism. I hated that shit. And I hated thinking it had so much power over all our lives, even the people I knew best. Even me. I wanted to figure out all that bullshit in between us, so now there was something else I wanted to do. I wanted to see the whole dude who lived that life. I was freaking exhausted when I got home, but it didn't matter because my fights for the day weren't done. Ma always had Thursday nights off. It was her first night home in 7 days, and when I got in, I learned that yes, Coach had called and warned her that something was going on between Guzzo and me. So, there I was, looking like a crazy person, and there was Ma, looking at me like I was a crazy person. And at first she just fluttered around trying to make sure I didn't have a broken nose or jaw or loose teeth or any of that, but when she finally accepted that the worst of it was a bruise on my cheek and a lip that looked like I'd tried to eat spaghetti with a steak knife, she finally sat down across from me at the little round kitchen table, leaned her head into one hand, and asked me what the hell I was doing. Willie was at the table too, doing homework, and I looked to him. "See that?" I said. "Not what did Guzzo do? What did I do?" Ma frowned, pointed to my bloody t-shirt. "Don't be coy with me, Quinn Marshall Collins." "Ma!" Willie yelped. "Come on, Guzzo beat him up. Why are you getting on him?" I stuck out my fist and Willie bumped it. "Thanks, man," I said. Ma raised a half smile at Willie. "You can't play 2 against 1 on me. I'm immune. I'm your mother." "But Ma!" Willie said. She reached over and gently held his wrist. "Please," she said, "let me speak with your brother." She turned back to me. What are you doing with that shirt? Letting people know I'm going to the march. You aren't going to the march, Quinn. Yes, I am. No, you are not. I'll miss work tomorrow night. We'll all stay home and we'll have a family night at home for once. Ma, I said, I'm going to the march. Listen, she said. After Coach Carney called, I called Rita. Guzzo told her why the two of you got into a fight. She sat back, folding her arms across her chest, accusatory. I know this is all complicated, but think about what you're doing to the Galuzzos. She pointed to the shirt again. What is all this? You're not marching. She paused, rubbed her forehead, and when she was calm again, she continued. Honey, I know you think you are doing the right thing, but you aren't. I think I am. No, what you are doing is thinking very selfishly. She got up and poured herself a glass of water and stayed standing against the counter. You think you are taking the moral high road, but what does this all mean for the rest of your family, Quinn? What does it mean for me and your brother? I'm kind of hoping you'll have my back. No, Quinn, look, she continued. Just step out of the way. Even if it's ugly at school, this isn't your fight. Why are you jumping into the middle of it? I'm already there, Ma. I was there Friday night. Ma, I saw it. I'm right in the middle of it, which is why I can't do nothing. She took a sip of water and stared at me. Have you seen the video, Ma? Willie turned to me. I have. What? Ma cried. Why would either of you watch it? Watch the fool they're making Polly out to be? Do you see what you've done, Quinn? You're just dragging us all into it with you. Ma, I said, pushing back my chair and standing. You're already in the middle of it too. I think we all are. She gripped the countertop. I don't know how to talk to you right now. She paused and then added, What would your father say if he were here? She never invoked Dad. Even though the whole town whipped out their St. Springfield cards whenever it was most convenient, Ma never did. Dad had been her high school sweetheart, her husband, and the father of her two boys, and so for her, that's what came first. He wasn't a symbol, he was just gone. Gone for 7 years now, and Ma was frigging exhausted. I don't know, I said, working hard to keep my voice level. But I know he stood up for what he believed in. I walked across the kitchen and wrapped my arms around her. She put her glass down and hugged me back, her thin fingers holding on to me tight. When Paul Galuzzo told me he was signing up to become a cop, he and I were practicing three-pointers in the Galuzzo driveway. I was in 9th grade, and basketball tryouts were 1 week away. Guzzo was still inside, changing, and before he came out, Paul tossed the basketball up and down in one hand and dropped his other hand on my shoulder. Your dad, he told me. Just thinking about him inspires me. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I realize your father was a hero. I want to be somebody like that. I want to be somebody who makes a difference, too. He might have been the 200th person to tell me my father was a hero, but this was the strangest time because it was the first time I'd heard someone say it, and it didn't piss me off. Man, you already are somebody who makes a difference, I told him. He laughed. Nah, but I mean, make a difference in the world, like a real difference, like your dad. I did not want to be a hero. I did not want to make any of what had happened in the last week about me. There was a guy who'd just spent 6 days in the hospital because the guy who'd been my personal hero for 4 years had put him there. Paul beat Rashad. That was the truth. And if Ma was going to talk about Dad, so was I. She didn't remember Dad the hero. She remembered Dad the man. And so did I. I knew him too. He was a hero. Not in the way people always talked about him, not the soldier, not the war hero, but because of the person he was. Paul had gotten it all wrong. Becoming a cop would not make him a hero, but what kind of cop he became could have. I've been thinking about that all day, but I didn't have the words for it until Ma brought up Dad. Everybody wanted me to be loyal. Ma wanted me to be loyal. Gutso wanted me to be loyal. Paul wanted me to be loyal. Your dad was loyal to the end, they'd all tell me. Loyal to his country. Loyal to his family, they meant. But it wasn't about loyalty. It was about him standing up for what he believed in. And I wanted to be my dad's son. Someone who believed a better world was possible. Someone who stood up for it.
Rashad. My mother did eventually show up with the lawyer she found Wednesday evening, but by the time she got there, I was wiped. Maybe from getting up so early talking with Dad, or maybe from actually talking with Dad, or maybe from talking with Mrs. Fitzgerald, or maybe from all of it. I was beat. I tried to rally up the energy because this attorney, a young woman named Maya Whitmire, was definitely there to talk business, or law, or whatever, but I just couldn't. I was so sick of talking about it. Son, can you at least just tell her the story beginning to end? My mother requested. And of course I did. Again, I rambled off every detail just like I had done with my parents, my brother, and my friends. Miss Whitmire took notes in crazy fast writing and asked if the officer ever even read me my rights. The right to remain silent, the right to blah blah blah. Which, once I thought about it, I realized he hadn't. He just skipped to the part about me not having the right to be in that store. She then explained that this should be open and shut, which was lawyer talk for easy. But we all knew that it wasn't that simple. These types of cases were never easy. We had all seen cops get away with far worse, so why would this be any different? I mean, I wasn't killed. True, I hadn't even touched the cop. The video footage showed it all. I even had a witness. Still, there was no such thing as open and shut in cases like these. But I appreciated the lawyer's confidence. I guess somebody had to be hopeful. There were so many questions I had for the lawyer, like why exactly she felt like this was going to be open and shut. But honestly, I was just too exhausted to even get into it. Before drifting back to sleep, I made sure to give my mother Miss Lansing's card. I barely glanced at it when she gave it to me, but before I handed it to my mom, I checked it out. Katie Lansing, archivist, Springfield Department of Records and Information Services. Under her name and title was her phone number and email. Seemed like another office job to me. Anything that said Department of just meant the job came with a cubicle and benefits. At least that's what Spoonie always said. I handed the card to my mother. This is the lady who was in the store. She was here today, I said. Here? My mother asked, nearly leaping out of her seat. The lawyer did the exact same thing. Yeah, she came by to see me. She told me to tell you that she would testify. My mother stared at the card, a huge smile coming across her face, then handed it to the lawyer, who scanned it, then nodded and murmured, "This is good. This is good." And that was good night for me. Thursday morning, I was awakened by Dr. Barnes. He had come by to let me know that my vitals had been stable for 48 hours now. Clarissa had been keeping track, and I had been keeping up with my spirometering, and the internal bleeding had finally subsided. I just needed to stay put for a few more hours and then he'd be discharging me. Well, once my parents got there. Best news ever. I was ready to go. I took a shower, making sure I didn't get the bandage on my nose too wet, and I had to wash my torso lightly. Even the slightest pressure on my ribs still made me see white. But when I got out of the bathroom, I realized that the only clothes I had were the ones I had on when I got to the hospital. My mother hadn't brought me anything clean to wear besides fresh underwear. She brought 8 pairs! Actual clothes seemed to slip her mind. And if she hadn't thought about it, I knew my father hadn't thought about it. And Spoonie, forget about it. I reached into the bottom drawer of the side table, which was also a dresser, and pulled out the plastic bag stuffed into it. I picked at the knot in the drawstring. Damn! It was tight, until the mouth of the bag finally opened. I pulled my clothes out. First my jeans. I gave them a shake and laid them on one of the chairs. They were filthy, and there was a small hole in the left knee, the knee that hit the ground first. Next came my shirt, swatting it out of the tight ball it had been in for the previous 5 days. The wrinkles deep and seemingly permanent. There was blood up by the collar. I laid it on another chair. The jacket Spoonie gave me was in the closet. I opened that door, looked at the sleeve ripped a good 3 inches in the shoulder seam. I didn't bother taking it out. No reason to yet. I felt exhausted again. So I sat on the edge of the bed in nothing but clean boxers and looked at my clothes all ragged and torn. My blood on the shirt, concrete dust dingying up the denim, clothes that I would probably never wear again. "Hello?" Clarissa's voice came from behind the door, just before she poked her head in like usual. I didn't flinch. It honestly didn't matter. "Oops, I'm sorry," she said, noticing that I wasn't dressed. "It's cool," I replied, grabbing the gown. "Come in." Clarissa came in as I snapped the gown shut. "So I hear you're leaving us," she said, pushing in the breakfast tray for the last time. "That's what Dr. Barnes said." "Good," Clarissa said. She twisted her hair up in a bun and checked my vitals. I guess just as a final precautionary measure. It would have sucked if she heard something weird in my heart, or if my temperature or blood pressure was high and then I couldn't go home. Luckily, everything was fine. "So what's the first thing you're going to do when you get out of here?" Funny, I hadn't really thought about it. I just wanted to go home. "I don't really know. I guess try to see my boys, put on some clean clothes," I said, smirking awkwardly. Clarissa glanced to the chairs where I had my dirty t-shirt and jeans spread out like some kind of strange art exhibit. "Oh my," she put her hand over her mouth. "You want me to put those back in the bag?" "No," I said. "I got it." I grabbed the shirt and jeans as Clarissa held the bag open for me to dump them in. I didn't want her to have to touch that stuff. Then I tied the drawstring back in a knot and made the decision right then and there to put the bag in the trash. "Well, I'm probably not going to see you, so you make sure you take care of yourself." "Thanks for everything, really." I sat back on the bed as Clarissa gathered up her equipment. "But before I go, I wanted to ask, did you ever finish that drawing you were working on?" "Yeah, I finished it yesterday." I slid my sketch pad off the dresser and handed it to her. "Wow," Clarissa said, gazing at the paper, then glancing back at me. "Rashad, this is incredible. You should be proud." Then she looked a little closer. "Hey, this one has a face." "Yeah." "Why?" "Because, well, whoever is looking at this scene, you, me, I don't know, that lady Claudia James, my friends, my family, Mrs. Fitzgerald." "Who?" "This lady I met," I said. "Anyway, all of us looking at the scene see the person who has the hand put through the chest, the dude with his heart torn out. It's impossible to ignore him. He has a face. He deserves a face." Clarissa looked from the drawing to me, then back to the drawing. "Yeah, he does." My mom and dad showed up a few hours later. I had texted my mother reminding her to bring me clean clothes, which she did. I also texted English, Shannon, and Carlos to let them know that I was finally on my way home. Hashtag Rashad is absent again today is what they all texted back, along with Thursday, 5:33 p.m. from Los. About time. I almost had to really steal Tiff. Give her a shoulder to cry on. Thursday, 5:34 p.m. from Shannon. Dude, I'm so glad you're out. Shit is crazy. Gutso got into it with Quinn at practice. You know Quinn? Thursday, 5:35 p.m. to Shannon. Who is Quinn? Thursday, 5:36 p.m. from Shannon. He's on the team. Mean jump shot. You might not know him, but Gutso his boy, and they went at it over this whole thing. Thursday, 5:38 p.m. from Los. I'm coming over tonight around 8, soldier boy. No crying. I know how much you've missed me. LOL. Thursday, 5:39 p.m. from English. Dude, we gotta talk. School is intense. Everybody's picked a side. Thursday, 5:41 p.m. to English. I know. Come through tonight. Los is coming. Bring Shane. And before I knew it, I was leaving the hospital wearing a sweatsuit, carrying nothing but my notepad. But before we left, I tore out the piece I'd drawn and set it on the food tray for Clarissa, just to thank her again. I wish I could have seen Mrs. Fitzgerald one more time, but the truth is, when it was finally time to go, I was ready to get the hell out of there. I didn't want to make any extra stops. Apparently, the lawyer my folks hired asked the media to give us some privacy, which was a good thing because we didn't have to dash from the hospital to the car through a mob of cameras and microphones. That would have been too much for me. Instead, it was just a few short, peaceful steps from the door to the car. I sat in the back seat as my dad drove through the city. Neither of my parents said much, which was weird. I had this strange feeling like they were uncomfortable around me or around each other. Something was different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I cracked the window, the fall crisp seeping in, the familiar static of air pushing through a tight space, through neighborhoods, down the crowded streets, 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, red light. My father put his blinker on, but there was no reason for him to turn. We lived straight ahead, but he made a left at 3rd and went around the block, coming back out to Main Street at 5th, the whole time glancing at me weird through the rear view. But I knew what he was doing. He was dodging 4th Street. He wanted to skip Jerry's, as if him not driving by had made it no longer exist. As if that's all it would take to help me forget. Maybe he was doing it for himself. But the way my parents were acting made it clear that this was something they had discussed. I decided not to bring it up, and instead just sat quietly until we got to the house, where I went straight in my room to be around all my things. All my faceless sketches taped to the wall above my tiny twin bed. But more importantly, I needed my computer so that I could scour the internet to try to catch up on my own life. You know how weird it is to hashtag yourself? To read posts and updates other people, most of whom you don't even know, make about you? It's strange. But I did it anyway. Hashtag Rashad is absent again today brought up hundreds, maybe 1,000 posts. Some were just pictures of all these random places with that tag, just like Spoonie showed me. I knew where the first one started. At least I thought I knew. But I had no idea where all the other ones came from. Other links connected to the hashtag were of the news clips. Turns out, I was only watching the local news channel. The hospital could only get 5 or 6 channels anyway. But I was being covered in all the newspapers, and even on cable news channels. What the? This was insane! There were clips of panel discussions where preachers and community leaders sat around arguing for me, defending me. I mean, not just me, but, And then there were some clips of people defending Galuzzo. Everyone saying the same thing. He was just doing his job, and he's a good guy, and we don't know if that boy was stealing or not. And there were pictures of people holding up pieces of paper with the hashtag written on it. Some of them just said absent again. There was even one of somebody in a t-shirt. I couldn't see the face, but written on the front of the shirt was, "I'm marching," and then the back said, "Are you?" Besides all this, the wildest part was seeing all the pictures of me snatched from websites and social media pages. Some of them were me dressed in my usual everyday wear, jeans sagged just below the waist, t-shirt, sneakers. Pictures of me throwing up the peace sign. Some, the one Spoonie feared, of me flipping off the camera. Carlos and the fellas had been cropped out. These images would have nasty comments under them from people saying stuff like, "Looks like he'd rob a store," and "If he'd pull his pants up, maybe he would have gotten away with the crime." LOL. And is that a gang sign? Other pictures were of me in my ROTC uniform. Of course, those had loads of comments like, "Does this look like a thug?" And "If he were white with this uniform on, would you still question him?" Everything was a mess. The real world. The cyber world. All of it. I wanted to turn the computer off, but it was like seeing a car wreck. You keep looking. And I kept digging, deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, finding pictures and comments about my family. People saying that my father was a dirty cop and asking why everybody cared so much about me when my dad shot a kid for the same reason years ago. Oh, so just because Officer Galuzzo's white, everybody's mad now? What about Officer Butler? This kid is the son of a bad cop. Karma is a bitch. I have to admit, that one stung the most. Rage started to surge through me, but instead of shutting my computer down, I decided to try to look up Darnell Shackelford. I hated knowing what I now knew about my father. That he had done this to someone. And even if he didn't mean to, he ruined an innocent kid's life forever. All because of fear and assumption. And even though my father lived with the guilt, I now had to live with it too. So as I clicked on the first image link to pop up, as I stared at Darnell's high school senior picture, the arms of his wheelchair peeking into the camera too, I made it clear to myself that this protest, this whole thing, was also for him. English, Shannon, and Carlos got to my house around 8. My mother ordered Mother's Pizza for us and had Spoonie pick it up on his way in. We sat at the kitchen table waiting as patiently as possible for Ma to pick her slices before we dove in, tearing the cheesy triangles from the pie as if we had never eaten pizza before. "So what's been going on?" I said, picking off the pepperonis and eating them like chips. Seemed like a stupid question to ask, but up until that point, we'd all been sitting there listening to Carlos ramble on about how he thought Silky Wilkes really liked him. "I know y'all didn't come over here just to let this dude talk about Latrice." "Nah, it was for the free pizza," Shannon said with a smirk. "Oh, really?" from my mother, who was using a fork and knife to cut hers. "Kidding, Mrs. Butler." "Man, seriously, we just wanted to catch you up," English cut in. "People have been on edge. Even me. A few days ago, I got into it with that dude Quinn I was telling you about. He was kicking all that Paul was doing his job crap while you were laid up in the hospital with your ribs busted. I mean, it's wild. But then today, that same dude got into it with Guzzo at practice. Then afterward, the dude, Quinn, came up to me to say that we should just call this one play we have. It's like an isolation play for me. I had no idea what he was talking about. He agreed that we should just call it Rashad." "What?" "Yup. Coach Carney named it Fist, but I called it Rashad in practice, and I'm going to call it that in the game too." Quinn was with me. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked, feeling really weird. Plus, I didn't want English to get benched for something like renaming a play after me. "Dude, at this point, I don't care. It ain't like people ain't thinking about it anyway. It's on everybody's mind. Plus, Rashad is absent again today, caught on like wildfire," Shannon said. I looked at Carlos, who was trying to shove a whole slice in his mouth. "What?" he grunted. "I know it was you," I said. "And for the record, you should have did it in a way where the paint dripped, almost like vampire blood style." Carlos chewed and chewed, then finally swallowed. "I don't know what you're talking about," he smiled, "but that's a good idea." Spoonie shook his head, but not in the my little brother and his annoying friends way, in the proud way. "So this protest," he said, getting down to business. "It's tomorrow at 5:30, English said. We're starting at Jerry's and working our way down to the police station." "Y'all are gonna miss practice?" I asked, concerned. "Who cares?" Shannon said, nodding to me. "My boys, my brothers. You should know, Shad, that Tiffany has been working with Jill and they've been planning the crap out of this thing. Her and Jill have been the main students organizing it from our school." "But it ain't just our school," English explained quick. "It's all kinds of people. Other schools, folks in the neighborhood, different businesses." "I called Pastor Johnson and he said he'd round up some folks too," Ma added. I was cool with the pastor coming, but my mother being on board, that really got me. My father, well, I wasn't sure. He wasn't out there with us, was he? Nope. He was in his room, hiding. Spoonie leaned forward. "Fellas, can I make a suggestion? When we get to the station, we should have a die-in." "A what?" My mother went bug-eyed, probably at the word die. "A die-in is basically when you lie on the ground as a form of protest. Sort of like how the sit-ins were back in the day, but when you lie down, they can't push you over. They can't do anything to you, really, because you're already on the ground." "They could kick you." My mother wasn't a fan of this idea. "But they won't. Too many cameras," Spoonie looked at Ma. "I promise. It'll be fine." She nodded nervously. "But once we lie down, then what?" I asked, because the way I saw it, putting my body back on the sidewalk wasn't my idea of a protest. It was my idea of a nightmare. "Then we make the most powerful statement we can make." Spoonie dug in his bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "We read every name on this list out loud."